Butter is making a comeback. Sales rose 4% last year, according to market researchers Mintel, and they are predicting is losing out. Sales have been declining, and last week, the head of spreads for Unilever, the people who make big brands like Flora and Stork, quit his job. Some analysts speculated it was a sign that the company might be trying to move away from the margarine business. Our reporter Catherine Carr went to meet Alex Rushmer, head chef at the Hole in the Wall restaurant in Cambridge, where butter is firmly back on the menu.
In the kitchen we use a very basic unsalted butter for all the cooking, and we use an unpasteurised butter that is made for us by Lincolnshire Poacher, not too far away from here, and it's really rich, it's really creamy, it's got a really nice salty hit to it, it's absolutely lovely.
There are some chefs that go one step further and make their own butter. Do you do that here?
I would love to say that we make our own butter. It's one of those things that I've tinkered with in the past. I just don't have time to do it at the moment, but it's becoming massively fashionable for chefs to start doing more and more things in-house, whether it's curing their own ham or churning their own butter. So it's something I'd like to have a dabble with.
Do you know anyone who actually does it, or is it just a rumour, a myth?
I'm pretty certain that they do it in a number of Scandinavian restaurants. The new Nordic movement is famed for its use of very, very fresh raw milk butters. I have a feeling that there's a restaurant called the Sportsman in Kent, which is one of the finest gastropubs in the country. They do it as well.
Why use butter? Why not use something different, an alternative or a substitute, as a chef?
Butter is one of those truly unique products that behaves in a way that nothing else does. There really is no substitute for proper butter. It's a natural ingredient. It's cream, and if you want a little bit extra, then it's some salt. That's it. You know exactly where it's come from farm to table. It's very easy to source. From a cooking perspective, we couldn't make cakes, we couldn't make biscuits, we couldn't make shortbread without butter, we couldn't do anything in the pastry kitchen without butter. I think a lot of people will be shocked at the number of cases of butter that a restaurant like this gets through over the course of a week. And then from a savoury perspective, it allows you to fry things and get an incredible finish, not just visually, but also from a flavour perspective. The caramelisation of butter, the Maillard reaction that takes place when the sugars in the butter hit a hot pan, they add a totally different complex flavour to any meat or fish or even vegetables that you're cooking with it. It really is like nothing else. There is no substitute for proper butter.
Tell me how you feel about spread then.
I cannot remember the last time I ate any sort of spread or margarine or anything like that. I learnt a long time ago that when margarine was initially invented, when it was marketed in the States, by law it had to be coloured red so that it wasn't confused for butter. And here, margarine tends to be coloured yellow. Its sort of natural state, for want of a better word, is a sort of sludgy off-white colour, which isn't appealing to anybody. I don't think anything with an ingredient list that is that long, that needs to be dyed before it looks anyway palatable, should be... I mean, it has no place in my kitchen, that's for sure.
Well, that was Catherine Carr speaking to Chef Alex Rushmer. I did want to know what he was cooking, and it was, in fact, fresh hake with roasted cauliflower, which sounds delicious. Dr. Aseem Malhotra is an NHS cardiologist, advisor to the National Obesity Forum. I expect we're all hungry now. Butter, is it good or bad for you? What should we be doing?
It's a very good question, Louise. I think the first thing to say on a broader perspective is don't fear fat. Fat is your friend. Now, if you look at butter specifically, the demonization of butter and saturated fat, and that's why people have traditionally over the last sort of 30 years or so been worried about the health effects of butter, has been based upon the fact that it's high in saturated fat, and that raises LDL cholesterol. But the science has evolved in the last 30 years or so, and what we now know is that actually the overall cardiovascular effects of butter are probably neutral. I'm not saying it's good for you from a cardiovascular perspective. I'm not saying it's bad for you either, but certainly can be enjoyed as part of a healthy diet. And certainly, I like to walk the talk, Louise, and I'm quite a big foodie. I cook myself, and I often cook my food and my vegetables in butter because it gives you a good flavour. Now, the other aspect to all of this, which I'm sure you're going to come on to anyway, is the fact that we've had a huge market and industry around margarines and these sort of low-fat spreads. And what we're now realising is that it's very likely that a lot of these consumption of vegetable oils are actually potentially harmful. So even very recently, Professor Emeritus for Neuroscience at Oxford University, John Stein, has done some research in this area, has raised concerns regarding people actually using vegetable oils such as sunflower and other vegetable oils for cooking, that they raise toxic chemicals called aldehydes when they're cooked at high temperatures, which are actually very strongly now linked to cancer, probably also dementia and heart disease.
Right, so what do you say to your patients then about, I don't know, full-fat cheese, yoghurt, all those sort of things?
Well, Louise, I have to just be very honest with them and tell them what I genuinely believe, looking at the science myself and what I follow. And actually, what's interesting about the full-fat stuff is that when you look at diets now, which are low in carbohydrates, so in particular cutting out refined, all sort of added sugars, refined and refined carbs, sort of white bread, etc. If you have more fat, actually, even for weight, it seems to be much more beneficial. So what I tell my patients really is to go for the full fat products. In particular, we now know there's some Cambridge research done again very recently, which looked at hundreds of thousands of people across Europe and looked at type 2 diabetes, and there's a very strong association that if you consume full fat dairy, in particular cheese and yogurt, it's associated with a reduction in the risk of developing type 2 diabetes and heart disease.
The danger is, isn't it, we're told, it seems, every month it seems to be changing. Do you think there is a sort of sea change in advice at the moment? That is why we're talking about it, for example, today.
I think there is actually, Louise, and I think that's happening gradually. I think one of the, certainly, and this is something I've said publicly before, I have no doubt in my mind, looking at the science, that unfortunately, the current government dietary advice, which asks us really to restrict the amount of total fat we're consuming to less than 30% of calories and eat more carbohydrates, which changed in the late 70s and early 80s in the United States and the UK, is actually a root cause of the epidemic of obesity and type 2 diabetes. And we need to change that advice. And certainly what I would recommend to everyone listening is that where we do know there is definite benefit in terms of cardiovascular health is diet that really is rich in extra virgin olive oil, green vegetables, nuts, oily fish. We know they're very beneficial. Now, on top of that, and this is what I do myself, you can certainly add in, cooking in butter, avoid vegetable oils, and go for full-fat dairy.
You're just making me hungry. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Aseem Malhotra. And just one quick email. Doddy says, he's changed from margarine to butter recently. He says, I shall never go back to man-made spreads, but spreading the stuff is a forgotten art I'm having to learn.